Many of you have probably seen this image. It captures the Artemis II launch, a mission that made two things real at once. Humanity's return to lunar orbit for the first time in 50 years, and a new record for the farthest sustained presence of Homo sapiens in space. Yet impressive as it is, this mission is only a prelude to a whole series of breathtaking human ventures in space that are now approaching and are set to define the years ahead. Orbital data centers, private international space stations, bases on the moon, and ultimately, the colonization of Mars. After decades in which such ideas existed mainly in the realm of science fiction, it now seems that humanity has crossed the Rubicon and is moving boldly into the unknown, into the vast abyss of space, ready to undertake the most ambitious projects in history. So is this a new Cold War space race? Not exactly. This time it will be different. This will not be a frantic sprint between two superpowers driven by Cold War rivalry, a contest in which, in truth, there was only ever one winner. This will be a race shaped by dozens, even hundreds of companies from around the world, building the ecosystem of future space settlers. We are heading into space, but this time we are going there to stay, permanently. The first wave of space colonization begins. It is safe to assume that the future power of AI will be built on intelligence from space, and access to it will be one of the key resources of the 21st century. The world has already recognized companies involved in semiconductors, data centers, and rare earth minerals, as reflected in their valuations. If AI is to become the world's new infrastructure, the conquest of the stars will only accelerate that trend. Nowadays, we have the tools not only to observe change, but also to be part of it. That is why I have been using XTB Investment app, also a partner of this channel. XTB gives me access to over 8,800 stocks and ETFs, including companies like the ones we discussed today. And as long as my monthly turnover doesn't exceed the equivalent of 100,000 euros, I can buy stocks and ETFs on XTB commission-free. Then 0.2% provision applies. Remember that investing always involves risk. It is hard to put into words what has been happening in the space industry over the past months and years. In the United States alone, several families of reusable rockets are now being developed, backed by the fortunes of American billionaires. In China, at least 3 companies are working on similar systems, while even private firms in Europe are trying to catch this extraordinary wave of momentum. NASA is announcing plans for a permanent base on the moon. Musk is unveiling visuals of a 50-kilometer electromagnetic catapult on the lunar surface, while at the same time sparring with other industry giants over who will place more servers in space. His company, SpaceX, has already filed a formal request with the relevant authority for permission to deploy 1 million server satellites in orbit. We are only months away from the launch of the first private space stations from companies such as Vast and Axiom. After the amazing breakthroughs of the 1960s and 1970s, humanity lost some of its drive to keep pushing past one barrier after another. But today there is little room to doubt. We are standing on the threshold of developments that could carry human civilization beyond Earth. So what breakthroughs lie ahead? Orbital data centers. It is impossible not to begin with the new gold rush, orbital data centers, which in the millions could soon surround the entire Earth. So what exactly is this about? And how realistic is it? Let's take a look. The current AI boom runs on servers that consume staggering amounts of money. But these are not just the servers used to train AI models. There are also the often overlooked servers used for inference, Put simply, some servers are used to build AI, others to serve the people using it. It is this second category that is now at the center of attention, because as the number of users rises, so too will the computing power needed to support them. The biggest firms, OpenAI, Google, xAI, Anthropic and Meta, are planning to spend tens of billions in the coming years on new data centers. But they are gradually running into limits. And that limit is not just cheap production capacity, but growing public resistance. Whether that resistance is justified or not is a different story. The fact is that companies are already struggling to secure the energy needed to run enormous data centers. And over time, that challenge will only grow. Suitable land, power access, and infrastructure will become harder to find. The number of viable locations for major data centers is finite. Or rather, we should put it differently. The number of such locations on Earth is finite. That is why even the biggest players are now looking up and looking to the stars. While Elon Musk's plans are often dismissed as unrealistic, orbital servers constellations have also been proposed by Google, Jeff Bezos, Blue Origin, and Nvidia. For the startup StarCloud, SpaceX of course holds a major advantage here, especially after acquiring Musk's other company, xAI, just a few weeks ago. The space company is now responsible for roughly 90% of the mass launched into orbit each year. So why put servers in space? Contrary to popular assumptions, the main argument against it is the cost of lifting a kilogram into orbit. But that too is changing rapidly, and those costs are likely to fall sharply in the coming years. In fact, we already have almost the full set of technologies needed to build such constellations. These satellites would have a virtually unlimited source of solar power, while low-cost mass production would make it possible to ignore the need to service failed units, which would simply burn up in the atmosphere or be moved to the so-called graveyard orbit. But what about cooling? Wouldn't a vacuum make that harder? In fact, the opposite is true. Here on Earth, cooling can consume up to 40% of a data center's energy use. In space, that kind of cooling is effectively free. Under the Stefan Boltzmann law, heat is emitted into space as infrared radiation through radiative cooling. Deployable external radiators would easily handle the heat generated by orbital processors, especially since these systems would likely use specialized chips that manage heat far better than their Earth-based counterparts. And despite how people often imagine orbital data centers, they would not look like giant facilities in space. In reality, they would consist of hundreds of thousands of small satellites linked by laser communications, much like SpaceX already does with Starlink. What needs to be stressed, these are not investor decks or promises set far into the future. This is happening here and now. Nvidia has announced its Vera Rubin space processor, while SpaceX and Tesla have begun building a factory for D3 chips designed specifically for use in space. All of this is happening alongside formal applications to deploy such satellites in orbit and prototype tests already underway in space. Elon Musk goes even further, arguing that this is the first step toward pushing humanity to level 1 and eventually level 2 on the Kardashev scale. Proposed by the Soviet astronomer Nikolai Kardashev, the scale measures the technological advancement of civilizations. Type 2 refers to a civilization capable of harnessing all of the energy emitted by its central star, in our case, the Sun. In this vision, millions of chips in space would use that energy to create what Musk calls radical abundance, a world in which humanity can meet all of its needs. SpaceX will clearly have an edge in this segment, but other giants want in as well. Blue Origin is expanding its efforts by working to increase the launch rate of its heavy reusable rockets. Eric Schmidt, the former Google chief, recently became both an investor in and CEO of Relativity Space, while OpenAI's Sam Altman has reportedly explored either investing in or acquiring Stoke Space. it is increasingly plausible that the future power of AI will be built on intelligence running directly from space. Internet and direct-to-device connectivity. All of this is possible because of a revolution that is already underway, even if its scale and impact often go unnoticed. The foundations were laid by SpaceX and its now legendary Starlink, a system that has not only supported Ukraine in wartime, but also brought fast internet to Africa, remote wilderness, ships and passenger aircraft. Starlink now has more than 10 million users, and that number is growing by tens of thousands each day. But this is only one part of SpaceX's much larger plan, a path that other companies are now beginning to follow. Amazon is building a rival constellation, as is Blue Origin with TerraWave. Both are tied to Jeff Bezos, but while Amazon is focused on individual users, Blue Origin's TerraWave is aimed at major business clients demanding enormous speeds, up to 6 terabytes per second. The European Union is developing its own system, IRIS-2, designed less to compete with Starlink than to give Europe strategic independence. Beyond that, there are several other initiatives of varying seriousness, including China's Tianfan or Space Sail, though for now it still trails far behind Starlink. We covered the strategic rivalry over low Earth orbit in a separate episode some time ago, and it is well worth watching. But those plans are already the first stage in a complete overhaul of the global communications system. Advances in technology, together with the lower orbits at which satellites are now being deployed, are making things possible that were once out of reach. A new generation of smartphone chips combined with the growing density of the Starlink constellation is allowing SpaceX to move into the mobile carrier market. The direct-to-device system allows ordinary modern smartphones to use satellite phone connectivity, and the next generation of chips, expected to arrive in phones by 2027, is meant to enable data transmission from space at speeds comparable to 5G mobile networks. Starlink Mobile, for which Musk's company bought spectrum assets from EchoStar for $17 billion, now offers its services through telecom partnerships to 12 million mobile users worldwide. The company has also entered bidding for additional spectrum worth tens of billions of dollars more. SpaceX's biggest rival in this field, AST SpaceMobile, is likewise offering services in partnerships with giants such as AT&T, Verizon, and Vodafone. This market is enormous, with a global value of roughly $1,250 billion a year. By offering both satellite internet and mobile connectivity, SpaceX has all the tools it needs to compete for hundreds of billions in annual revenue for this part of its business alone. That in turn is meant to help fund its far more ambitious plans for orbital data centers, and ultimately, the colonization of Mars. And there is little doubt that other space giants will try to reach for that money as well. Private space stations. But services for people on Earth are not the only direction from which space companies plan to draw profits. The aging International Space Station has long needed a replacement, and its retirement has already been delayed several times. A few years ago, NASA launched a fairly chaotic program to fund commercial space stations and selected several companies to work on them. That program alone would deserve a separate episode, so briefly, much of it fell apart. Companies withdrew, merged into larger groups, or changed course. To this day, the program remains highly controversial. Fortunately, some firms treated NASA funding as useful but not essential, and are now developing stations on their own. The most advanced, by far, is Vast Space, which plans to launch its currently tested module as the standalone Haven 1 space station in early 2027. Working with SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft, the module is designed to host a crew of 4. A year later, in 2028, the first module of a direct ISS successor is expected to reach orbit. Called Haven 2, it is meant to offer more pressurized volume than the ISS once construction is completed in 2032. Its crew of 12 is expected to have access to 510 cubic meters of living space and 1,160 cubic meters of total pressurized volume. The company's advantage lies in following the SpaceX model, focusing on in-house production of modules at its factory in the United States. Axiom Space took a different path. The company outsourced module construction to Europe. Thales Alenia Space has already delivered the first module to the United States, where it is to be attached to the ISS. That could prove to be Axiom's advantage. Attaching to the ISS may allow for faster returns and give company an edge in securing future NASA contracts. It also allows temporary use of the existing station, making it easier to spread out work on its later standalone modules and station. That leaves two major unknowns still in play. On one side stands Blue Origin, which joined forces with Sierra Space. Together, the two companies are working on the Orbital Reef platform. In recent years, there has been plenty of talk about tensions between the partners and a de facto slowdown in progress, but new reports have recently begun to emerge about renewed development. The station is supposed to offer space comparable to the ISS, but with fewer modules. One detail worth noting is that Sierra Space is developing inflatable modules. They would reach orbit in compact form and only then expand in space, making it possible to create genuinely large interiors. The problem is that most of these assumptions are now 5 years old, so a great deal may have changed. For now, we have to wait for an updated version of the plan. The second great unknown is, of course, SpaceX. Elon Musk's company has never announced its own space station, and there are no known reports that it is building one. On the other hand, SpaceX already has all the key pieces needed to build a major private station. It has a heavy lift launch system and the Starship vehicle, which is expected to offer 1,000 cubic meters of volume, more than the entire International Space Station. It also has life support systems from Dragon and from the Lunar HLS, the Human Landing System. It has the software, interior designs, and crewed mission experience as well. One day, Musk could simply walk onto a stage and announce a private space station, and instantly create a major problem for every competitor. It is also impossible to avoid the geopolitical questions. While the International Space Station was, well, international, access to space may now depend on fully private, fully American companies. Instead of international cooperation in low Earth orbit, states may soon become little more than customers of the American space industry. It is hard not to see that as a step backward, especially since nothing suggests that anyone outside the United States will be offering comparable services anytime soon. So where will geopolitical rivalry move next? That is the next part of our analysis. Without question, the moon will become a new arena of both competition and cooperation. Bases on the moon. On March 24, 2026, Jared Isaacman, NASA's new administrator, awaited by the agency almost like a savior, led the Ignition Conference. Its purpose was to present radical changes to the American space program, changes that will also have a major impact on the space programs of other countries. The first blow fell on the Lunar Gateway Station, which NASA simply walked away from, much to the disappointment, no doubt, of its partners in the European, Japanese, and Canadian space agencies, all of which had already been working on parts of the station. But is there really much to regret? Gateway had always been a forced compromise, shaped by shrinking budgets, the need to balance the interests of several space companies, and the limits of available rockets. It was supposed to be a small station in lunar orbit, expensive to maintain, and offering relatively little to the development of the space sector. Was anything offered in its place? Yes. Artemis Base Camp. The recent Artemis II flight was the first in a series of steps toward that goal. Artemis III, planned for 2027, is supposed to be a demonstration mission in low Earth orbit, testing Orion rendezvous and docking. Artemis 4 and 5, by contrast, are set to land humans on the moon in 2028. Artemis Base Camp is the natural extension of that effort, with lunar bases expected to emerge by 2033. A planned budget of $20 billion over the next 7 years is meant to fund the first human colony beyond Earth, located on the Moon's pole. That location is expected to provide access to lunar ice, which could be used to produce oxygen, hydrogen, and water. For NASA, a key priority is keeping together the partners in the Artemis Accords, a US-led set of non-binding principles for how countries should cooperate in civil space exploration, especially around the Moon. NASA's plans call for the Moon's surface to be flooded with prototype vehicles, modules, power systems, and industrial and mining technologies. This is meant to be made possible by regular crewed lunar missions, eventually as often as twice a year. That in turn is supposed to rely on commercial systems from companies such as SpaceX and Blue Origin, allowing the SLS rocket to be retired. The program also includes building the first nuclear power plants on the Moon, enabling not just human survival there, but the emergence of the first space industry. It sounds like science fiction, but these projects are already moving onto a path that looks increasingly feasible. Once again, as in the past, NASA wants to focus on projects of extreme ambition, while leaving the more routine ones to private providers. Washington will almost certainly use this program to underline its dominance in space once again. It is hard to imagine anyone but China trying to challenge that position. Western countries, along with some Arab states, will likely join American missions, while Russia is unlikely to play any major role in this race. China is pursuing its own lunar program aimed for a crewed landing around 2030 and planning to begin building a base soon after. That means one thing: the Moon is set to become one of the key arenas of strategic rivalry between the United States and China in the 2030s, and nothing drives human progress more than fierce competition. All of this is meant to lay the foundations for a space industry built around mining, processing, and manufacturing, and to make expansion deeper into the solar system far cheaper, toward the destination humanity has dreamed of for centuries: the Red Planet. Mars colonization. All the projects described so far are extraordinary, but the colonization of Mars is by far the most important mission humanity could undertake. Mars is the answer to all the equations above. Orbital servers, space stations, a lunar base, and a space industry are meant to provide not only the capital, but also the rationale for launching dozens or even hundreds of rockets into space every day. Elon Musk has finally found a way to fund his life's ambition, while NASA has at last begun taking space expansion seriously. That has pushed SpaceX plans back by a few years, but it also has made them more realistic. The first test flights to Mars are now expected in 2028, while the first cargo landing in 2030. This time they are supposed to be supported by a growing network of private companies, lunar experience, and an expanding human presence beyond Earth. Before our eyes, a new order is taking shape, driven not only by states, but above all by private capital, technology, and AI. First low Earth orbit, then the Moon, and beyond that, the Red Planet, Mars. In this new race, the stakes are no longer just prestige. They are not limited to influence, industry, data, connectivity, or a place in the future balance of power. What is at stake is also humanity's next great leap.